I'm Sandy. I work for UK Column. I'm a presenter with them, and I'm here really because my dear friends Rhonda and Jane, who've organised this tonight, asked me to introduce Guy. And I'm so delighted to do so, but I'd like also to thank Miles Johnston from Basis Project for doing the filming tonight, and a mention for Dijon, who's doing some amazing work with the peacekeepers in the courts, apparently. Obviously, I need to catch up with that as well, find out what's going on there. But anyway, we are so delighted to have Guy here tonight. He's written some amazing books talking about Tartarian and more, and I'm so interested to see what more there is, because it's all very interesting stuff that we probably haven't heard before. So, Guy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've normally got a microphone and I hide behind it, so this is and I've normally got notes as well. Right, well, who am I? There I am.
Which one?
It's funny because this shirt I'm wearing, which is black and white checkered, I wore it on a YouTube interview a while ago, and somebody said he's clearly still into the Freemasons because, it's black and white checkered. So, so that's me with our youngest son, Sam. I joined the Freemasons about 20 years ago because I wanted to find out if they knew what we don't. And it turns out they don't. At least not at the level that we can get to. If your breeding's right and you've got the right connections, then you can find out, I'm sure, a lot more. But I joined in the hope of finding out occulted knowledge, and my father had joined when he was about the same age as I was. And I left. I was a year away from being the master of the lodge, and I joined at Great Queen Street, which is the headquarters. It's the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom. And it's where it all happens, really. And I left because I was disappointed, I suppose. I thought that I was going to find out who built the pyramids. I thought I was going to find out everything that I'd wanted to know and more. But it turns out that actually it's a closed shop. Most people get to the rung I was at, which is the third level of 33. So there's a hell of a way to go. And what I didn't realise at the time was after the 33 degrees, there's another 66, and they're dark. My son on the left, he wanted to find out what I knew, but I wouldn't tell him, like my father wouldn't tell me either. So I let him find out the hard way. So he joined, and within a year, he said, "This isn't for me, Dad." The people in the background are flying squad. Everybody in my lodge, with the exception of Jim Davidson, you're probably all aware of who Jim Davidson is, they were all high-ranking serving police officers. And all I experienced was people joining because they wanted to expand their social circles, people joining because they'd recently become widowed and they were lonely, and people joining because they wanted to accelerate their career in the Metropolitan Police. And I saw that happen a few too many times and decided that actually, this isn't for me. It's costing a lot of money. And but anyway, my son joined. He wanted to be a Knights Templar. And I said, there's only one way to join the Knights Templar. You've got to become a Freemason, and then they'll invite you when you become a master. He didn't get that far. He had an ayahuasca ceremony, a proper one with shaman. And he travelled during lockdown when we weren't supposed to leave the country. But he actually said that there were no restrictions in place whatsoever. No one stopped him, no face masks on the flight, nothing at all. And he came back and said, "Dad," he was about to start training as an RAF pilot, and he was about to take his third degree. And he said, "I can't do this anymore." And he quit everything. And now he meditates and does yoga, doesn't he? And we call him our little Yoda. But anyway, that's me. So I have quite a bit of experience, 20 years in Freemasonry. And all I can say is that if you're joining it to find occulted knowledge, Google. Just Google. Save yourself a lot of time and money. If you're joining it because you're a serving police officer, I don't know if there are any in here, join, because you'll be an inspector within a couple of years. Has anybody heard of Tartaria? Yeah, you're all, yeah? So everybody's on the same page. So the slides that I'm going to show you now are basically my book, and in the same order of the chapters. And the first one is, has history been rewritten? And I think you're probably all aware that the answer is yes. And it starts off really with war. This photograph is after the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. I don't know if everybody here is convinced that atomic bombs are a real thing, but for me it was an awful lot of TNT. And what, you're right there. And what, from my research, I would suggest that a lot of wars actually take place for a different reason. Somebody a lot more intelligent than me once said, fighting for peace is the same as fighting for virginity. It's nonsensical, it's a parody. And I'm convinced that wars take place for two reasons. I don't think that it's to do with money anymore. I think, especially now with fiat currency, I don't think that money is actually a thing. But for me, it's to do two jobs. One is to get rid of architecture that shouldn't be where it is, and the second is to depopulate. And I think there's a lot of enjoyment from the parasite's point of view from watching us kill each other. So has history been rewritten? Yeah, so we've had war. This is a photograph of the taken during the Spanish flu, which was, I'm sure most people know, was caused by the Rockefeller Institute when they were testing vaccines on troops before they were shipped out to Europe. And with regard to history itself and the falsification of it, my hero is a gentleman named Anatoly Fomenko. Anatoly Fomenko calculated several things, and he was a Russian mathematician, very well respected. And one particular book he wrote is called New Chronology, and I'd recommend everybody reads it. If you're not a reader or you're not into in-depth reading, I've broken it down in my first book, so you don't have to. I've done the hard work for you. But what he worked out was that actually, not only has our history been falsified and people have been put in place that are fictitious, one of them being Napoleon Bonaparte, but periods of time have also been added to bolster our timeline. And this was done for a very specific reason. We're under the impression that we've evolved, that technology and us have evolved gradually, but actually we've gone the other way. And if we look at the technology that was available before, not just Tartaria, but the Atlantean technology where they were harnessing energy from the ether. And if you think about how we still burn fossil fuels today and we think that we're saving the planet by buying a Tesla, we've actually gone the wrong way. And the technology we have now is more harmful than anything. And Anatoly Fomenko worked out that actually what's been done has happened to kind of keep us in some sort of trap where we're convinced that we have progressed when actually we've kind of gone backwards. And this is the timeline that he proposed. The one that I'm going to talk about now is Grand Tartaria, the classical era. In biblical terms, it's referred to as the millennial reign of Christ, a period of 1,000 years where everything was built in harmony and resonance with the planet. Everything that was constructed vibrated at 432 hertz. And it did that to keep us well, to keep us in a sense of euphoria. And we then, well actually in 1776, we enter the period we're in now, the modern elite control network. Or Satan's little season, where a few bloodline families have really hijacked everything. And they've pumped us with chemicals, they've pumped us with poison and toxins. And it's not just what's in the sky and what's in the water and the air that we breathe, but also the music that we listen to and what we're subjected to when we go online and also with TV and media. we're kind of hit from lots of different directions and kept in this very low vibrational state. And Anatoly Fomenko also believes that our history has been whitewashed, that everything that we see, every credible invention, everything that's been patented that's enabled us to progress as far as the mainstream narrative would have us believe, has happened by a Caucasian. The person on the left is what we've been led to believe is Abraham Lincoln. The person on the right is Abraham Lincoln. They whitewashed everything, absolutely everything. And the British Empire, with the help of the Jesuits, have made sure that everybody that isn't Caucasian has been referred to since the empire started in 1776 on this particular mission, that they're referred to as savages, primitive, and even had indigenous people on exhibit in world's fairs across the world. And you can go online and you'll see there are lots of different comparisons or examples, of this. And it includes Shakespeare and lots of other people as well. The Tartarian Empire itself is really a region of land. You can't see it that clearly on here, but for most people they'll know it as being the Northern Hemisphere, predominantly Russia, going into Asia and Eastern Europe. But their ethos echoed around the world. And this map's from the 1500s, and it wasn't unusual to see maps like this, and you can Google that as well, Tartarian maps, and you'll see that it's broken into different regions. But it was very slowly and gradually replaced, again by the Jesuits. What we know as Tartaria became Mongolia and the Mongolian Empire. There's another example of a map here. And this particular one, if anyone's interested in seeing this one, you can't see it very clearly, but we've got a little app on our phone, Google Lens. Everybody can get it, it's free. And you can actually zoom in over the Latin and it will translate it in front of your eyes. And it shows you not just the region, but it also gives you examples of how they lived as well. And one of the things that they did, which was quite strange, is they used to hang the dead in the trees and let birds eat them. So they recycled back into the food chain, the circle of life. A lot of people say that, in mainstream at least, that Tartaria didn't exist, which is strange because not only do they appear on maps, but they have a flag. And the flag always represents the griffin. The griffin was very important to them, and that's for one specific reason. The griffin mates for life. And the Catholic Church hijacked the griffin and projected it as a symbol of marriage, because obviously, as we know from Henry VIII's experience, they have an issue with divorce. But unity, strength, companionship, and loyalty was part of the Tartarian Empire, and that's why they cherished the griffin. And this is taken from an old encyclopedia that we have at home. And what we've found is that older books still refer to Tartaria, and new books, they've slowly been replaced, and Tartaria has gone and it's become the Mongolian Empire. So whenever somebody says to me, well, Tartaria, that's pseudoscience, I think, well, it's a weird pseudoscience because they've got a flag. They've got a flag, they're on maps. You can see how it's been actually purposely removed. But who the Tartarians were goes all the way back to Magog. So in the Bible, Magog is the first person to start the Tartarian ethos, if you like. But perhaps, well, my favourite really is Gilgamesh. And I don't know if anybody's ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's what the Old Testament's based upon. It's the oldest text that we have that could be referred to as biblical. But Gilgamesh was the first ruler of the Tartarian Empire. And obviously, anybody who's followed 9/11 and the conspiracy surrounding it knows that actually the 9/11, the invasion in the Middle East was to remove his tomb. And I'm fortunate enough to know someone who was very high up in the military who was actually security at his tomb and watched them airlift his body, his remains out. And Hillary Clinton, I think there was a leaked memo that Hillary Clinton had written saying we must get his tomb. No one needs to see an 18-foot red-headed giant being dug out of the ground that we've claimed to be mythological. But he was the first ruler of Tartaria. And one that I learned about in Freemasonry is King Solomon. King Solomon was also a ruler of the Tartarian Empire. But perhaps the best known for most people will be Genghis Khan. And as Anatoly Fomenko said, our history has been inverted. Genghis Khan is not who you think he is. He was not a warmonger. He didn't rape and pillage. He was actually the first person in the world to allow the practice of every religion without persecution in his empire. He was also the first person to introduce a passport, but not as we have today, where it's almost like permission for you to leave the country and enter somewhere else. The passport that Genghis Khan introduced was actually to ensure safe travel for Europeans wishing to enter Tartaria. So you could travel around Asia and Eastern Europe and the Mongolian Empire and Russia with the sure knowledge that should anything happen to you, the people responsible would answer to Genghis Khan themselves. Now that doesn't, to me, sound like the person I was taught about at school. Also, there's another line of thought, and this is a big leap of faith. His father was called Yeshua. You all know who Yeshua is, yeah. He was conceived at exactly the same time that the person we refer to as Jesus was in Tibet. Where Jesus is supposed to be buried, which is Crimea, is where Genghis Khan's father is buried. And there is a mound there, and it is completely covered in crucifixes, wooden crucifixes, and every year people go there to pray to Jesus. Whether or not there is something going on there, I don't know. But I hope to travel there myself and actually see it. My mother's father is from Crimea, or Ukraine as we call it today. So I would like to go there and check it out for myself. But he's a classic example of the inversion of history. And this one's quite a sad one. This is the last queen of the Tartarian Empire. Her name's Jenapil. And the First World War and the Second World War, as most people know, the Second World War was kind of the First World War really after some respite, a continuation of the same problem. But the Tartarians were still around during the Second World War. Dresden was the only place really that was fully operational, still running on free energy at that time. And Jenapil was very respected as being the last, if you like, true Tartarian royalty. And Star Wars paid homage to her. This is Padme from Star Wars, who married Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker. And there's quite a lot of Tartarian influence behind the Star Wars films. And this is her, unfortunately, in 1943, pregnant, about to be shot in the back by Russian troops. And that was it. She was the last bloodline, royal bloodline from the Tartarian Empire. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that they were quite big as well. Not everyone, they came in all shapes and sizes, but a lot of the Tartarians were rather large, averaging around 12 feet tall. And that's why so many windows we see in old Greco-Roman style buildings are too high for us to look out of. And the doors don't make any sense at all. I mean, this building, for example, if you think when this was built, if we follow the narrative at least, the heating that they had available to them, the methods of heating, how would you heat this room? If hot air rises, then this ceiling's too high. And you can see evidence everywhere. Doors that are too big to justify really anybody our height using them. And you could say that it's grandiose, that people were showing perhaps wealth and status by building doors and rooms and buildings that are way too big for us. But actually it doesn't make any sense at all when you look at the workforce and the materials that were available at the time. And the more that you look into remnants of the Tartarian Empire, the more you'll see books that are too big for us, boots that are too big for us as well, and of course people. Not people suffering from giantism. This isn't genetic mutation. These are people that were wandering around with us. But of course, we've been brought up to believe that they're ogres. And any reference you ever hear in a children's story or a film to a giant, they're always going to eat us. There's always something nefarious about them. But actually they stood alongside us and fought with us. With regard to who wrote about them, obviously a lot of people other than myself have done this over the years. The first one was Marco Polo. Marco Polo actually wrote a book called My Travels, and they're about his time spent with Genghis Khan in the Mongolian Empire. But obviously, originally when it was written, it was the Tartarian Empire, but it's been, as additions have come along, it's been changed. But actually, he wrote about the incredible buildings and that they worked with frequency and understood resonance and vibration too, and that Genghis Khan had treated him like a son and assured, again, safe passage for him in his travels. So Marco Polo's travels, I've taken the bullet points from that and put it in my book, but he was the first person to actually write about them. I'll do Q&A at the end. The second is actually Peter Fleming. A lot of people will know his brother Ian for the James Bond novels, but Peter Fleming wrote a book about his travels, and he called it The Problem with Tartaria. And he was sent out there by the British military to see what was still going on. How many regions and towns and cities were still operating using energy that was being harnessed from the ether, and how many people were still following the Tartarian ethos, if you like. Then, of course, it appears in fiction, and you've got people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells that also, in their work, have referenced Tartarian technology. There's one Jules Verne film, which I think is, we watched it a little while ago again. I can't remember if it's Around the World in 80 Days, or I can't remember which one it is. But actually, there's even Tesla technology in that film. He's working on a contraption that actually sends video footage backwards and forwards, what we would call today Zoom or Skype. And there's H.G. Wells and Jules Verne actually writing about this and showing it in their films a long time before we even thought it was possible. But probably my favourite example of Tartarian technology, I suppose, or the Tartarian Empire being shown to us in plain sight but hidden through the works of fiction, has to be Back to the Future, the first film. I'm guessing everybody's seen it. So Marty McFly, as everybody knows, he's travelled back in time and he's stuck. The DeLorean's kaput, and he needs to get back to the future. The flux capacitor needs an incredible amount of power to do so. There's only one way they can do that. They have to wait for a lightning strike to hit the town hall. And when they do, Doc has rigged it up to the DeLorean so he can get the charge to the flux capacitor and travel back to the future. And the great thing about that is not only is this film showing you the power that can be harnessed from the Earth itself, from the ether, but also the building that they use to do it is the town hall, which is a Greco-Roman style building in the middle of nowhere, which is a typical Tartarian building. So again, it's always in plain sight. And I think that's because the parasites, as I call them, some people refer to them as the elite, but I can't think why anybody would do that. To me, they're parasitic. They live off us. They still do that now. Not just our energy, but they take money from us when they don't need it. You know, we know money isn't real. We know the Bank of England can put a few zeros on its balance and it's not going to matter. No one's going to question it. But they take money from us regardless. So we're kind of kept in this constant state of fear, worry about the cost of living. So I think that they truly believe that if they show us what they're doing, that they're never going to face karmic retribution. But my hope is that it's not like the poisoned apple analogy where I've got an apple, I inject some poison in it, and I give it to you, and I say, have an apple, I've just put poison in it, and you eat it, you've committed suicide. But if I don't tell you it's in it, I've murdered you. So I think they think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. If they tell us what's going on, and they use science fiction and fiction to do so, they've covered their arse. But I hope that they haven't. I don't know what happens when we die. Nobody does. Obviously, everybody here can't possibly know because you're here. But I hope if something does happen, if there is a heaven and hell, even if it's metaphoric, that I hope they haven't done enough. And I hope they pay for what they've done to us. So what did the Tartarians themselves do? Well, first of all, they understood cymatics. What you can do with water and sand, for example, when you subject it to different frequencies on a plate. Now, this is under a microscope. This is what you would see typically in church and cathedral windows, which is strange because they were built before we had a microscope, if we follow mainstream science and history. And what is interesting is every one of these circular windows in every one of these structures around the world are different. They're all different. How? Is that fluke? I mean, how did they know what water does when it's subjected to different frequencies? How could they possibly have known what it looks like under a microscope so long before the microscope existed? Today we went to Gloucester Cathedral. And I always find it interesting, especially if you get to speak to somebody in there that works there. I'm ordained, so I've got a little bit of ammunition up my sleeve. And I've challenged a couple of people and said, you do know what cathedral really means, don't you? They said, yeah, well, it's where the priest sits. I said, no, it's not. It's Latin for cathode ral. It's something that generates energy. These were not places of worship. These were places you went to heal. You went inside one and you were healed by the frequency. Everything in it resonated at 432 hertz. One received and one transmitted. And they would bounce this energy around the area too. The pipe organs originally were designed at 432 hertz to heal our internal organs, and that's why they're called pipe organs. That was the idea. And the bells too. The bells were designed at 432 hertz. And not only did they believe that that made us feel euphoric and gave us a sense of well-being, but also at the same time they believed that it kept away evil spirits and could to an extent modify the weather in the area that the bells were ringing. But as most people know, in the 50s, the Rockefeller Institute hijacked them, changed the frequency to 440 hertz, and that became the industry standard, not just for church bells, but for the organs and for the music we listen to as well. The only music out there right now that you could listen to that is at 432 hertz and always has been is classical music. And that's why the parasites tend to prefer that. They know what music can and can't do. It's the only thing we have that can change our mood like that. It can make us happy or sad in a second, just by what we're listening to. There have been a few people that have, towards their end of their career, changed the frequency of their music. They've gone against the industry standard and fought the record companies to do so. Unfortunately, they are all dead. Prince, Bob Marley, John Lennon, George Michael, Amy Winehouse, and there are quite a few others. So the rule of thumb is, if you want to produce music at 432 hertz, the correct frequency, you're going to have a short life and a very short career. And that's actually how a cathedral works. And inside the top of the building were tanks filled with red mercury. and that's what the energy was stored in. And then through cables, they looked like telegraph wires going all over the cities and towns. They actually sent the energy, the electricity to homes, and they were lighting streets. And we're going back 1,000 years ago. One of my favourite, I suppose, designs of the Tartarian Empire would be the Star Fort. There are 319 of them still actually on Earth. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what water does under a microscope at 432 hertz. That's the shape. Now, the Smithsonian Institute say that actually they're defensive fortresses, and they don't understand why they were built that way. They're not defensive fortresses. They're where you went when you were sick, and you could take your pets and livestock with you too, and you spent time inside the centre. The other interesting thing, and this doesn't serve much of a military purpose, they all align to constellations. And they're worth Googling. There are, well, as I said, 319 of them, and they don't look very defensive. They also built what we call onion domes. And these, at the top, this is where the energy came in, the electricity came in from the ether, and that's where the mercury tank sat with copper coils in. And again, these are photoshopped. It's what's called vanilla sky, where they whitewash the background. So you'll see in early photographs in the late 1800s that the background's always the same. It's always clear. You can't see clouds, you can't see anything at all, no trees, no buildings behind. And it's because they've put another plate. And it was very early Victorian photoshopping. They put another plate over it and it hides the cables. In some photographs, you can actually still see the cables running across the buildings, but you can't see them coming away from the buildings because they've been cut out. And perhaps one of the more recent sites, I suppose you would call it, would be the World's Fairs and Expositions that happened in every town and city in the world from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Most of them were allegedly built within 9 months. Some of them were acres. And all of them were burnt down accidentally or demolished within 9 months of opening. The Tartarian Empire in some circles is also referred to as the Empire of Free Travel. They had airships, and airships were free. You could travel anywhere in the world for free using an airship. And you got on and off in docking stations, and that's perhaps one of the most famous docking stations at the Eiffel Tower. This is a road in St. Petersburg, and it was recently dug up for some repair work to be done. And they found metal grid work underneath it. And this hasn't just been found in St. Petersburg, it's been found in lots of places across the world. No one could understand exactly what these metal grids do, or at least they're not supposed to understand what they do. Some have said that they're Roman, and some say that actually they were put in place to reinforce the roads. But if you look, they're not connected. So they can't reinforce the road because they can still move. Yeah, there's still movement there. They were electrically charged, and trams, electric cars and electric scooters, autopeds they were called then, were taking a charge from those as they travelled. So it was a little bit like a bumper car, but upside down. But they've been tarmacked over. So most towns and cities will still have those grids underneath the roads, but they've been tarmacked over so many times now that they're long gone. So what happened to the Tartarians? Probably one of the most major examples of what happened to them would be the Napoleonic Wars. And somebody asked me recently, well, what did they do with the bodies? Well, first of all, the Napoleonic Wars, people have actually written, who were fighting, had written back to their loved ones to say, when the smoke cleared, when the dust settled and we advanced, we saw that we'd been fighting people wearing the same uniform. We were killing each other. and it was depopulation. All of the civil wars took place around the same time. The Napoleonic Wars were perhaps the biggest example of that. But what happened to the bodies? Well, we ate them. The skulls went into catacombs. Most people just think of Paris when you think of catacombs, but they're everywhere. They're all over the world. I mean, Edinburgh's got catacombs. They're everywhere. The teeth, at the time, the most sought-after dentures you could get were called Waterloo teeth. So people were actually eating using the teeth of people that fell during the Napoleonic Wars. And ironically, if you had enough money and you had bone china, the china that you were eating your dinner off was made from their remains as well. But the worst part is the bodies from the people that fell in the Napoleonic Wars were shipped back to Britain and used as fertilizer in our crops. So at some point, you could, if you had dentures and had money, be eating using their teeth on a plate made from their bones with food produced from their remains. We ate the people that fell. Yeah. And of course, you had the American Civil War, and it goes on and on and on. But not happy with just getting us to kill each other, there were areas where that didn't work. So we had acts of genocide. Armenia, for example, is a classic one. And then, would you believe it, outbreaks, pandemics. And I'm sure everyone here is up to date with their vaccines for COVID. This has been going on for some time. You were, scared to death of not being vaccinated if there was an outbreak. So they got rid of who they could through war and through genocide, and then ultimately by releasing a few outbreaks here and there. Then, of course, we had the people that were still wandering around, the people that wouldn't comply, the people that came back from the wars. If you didn't follow from 1776, if you didn't follow New World Order, which started on the 4th of July, you were sent to prison. And if you notice, the building is red brick with white detailing. Or you went to an asylum. You see, it's a very similar building, red brick, white detailing again. They introduced something called the Lunacy Act, and the Lunacy Act meant that if your husband died in battle and you had children, you were technically classed as insane, because a woman on their own were not sane enough, if they'd lost their husband, to raise their children. The children became custody of the state. And they went to an orphanage. Red brick, white detailing. Now, the reason these buildings are all the same is because the buildings were already there. You'll find that old asylums, prisons, and a lot of buildings around the world today won't have the date they were built. They will have the date they were founded, which means found dead, found empty, and they're repurposed. In Tartaria, a red brick building with white detailing denoted a battery, a power source. And that's because red brick can harness and store energy. It's the same chemical reaction that creates rust. They were actually storing energy inside the very walls. So what the parasites thought it would be interesting to do would be to take people like us, stick them inside something that can harness energy and zap our life from us. And that's why we are charged and placed in a cell. It's always there in plain sight. They've just been very clever, but not clever enough. The fertilizer, the teeth, and the catacombs. Now, somebody said to me a talk, and they actually heckled me, and this was at Shine Festival, and they said, okay, so you've read a few books, you've got a few atlases. Is there any proof anywhere, any government proof that Tartaria was wiped out? Yeah. This is a declassified FBI document, CIA document. It's quite a hefty document, and I wouldn't read the whole thing out to you now because you'd still be here tomorrow night. I've got the guts of it in my book, but I'm just going to read this bit out for you because I don't know how well you can see it. But this was released This was declassified, sorry, in June 1957. On 9th of August 1944, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, sitting in Moscow, issued a directive order ordering the party's Tatar Provincial Committee to proceed to scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tatar history. In other words, Tatar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank, was to be falsified. It's there in black and white. If anybody wants a copy of that document, if you contact me, I can email it to you. And if you've got, a quiet winter's evening to yourself, you can have a read through it. It's grim. It's really grim. It's in black and white. They completely rewrote history to remove their existence. The Jesuits started it in the 1700s. The CIA finished it off. The person behind all of it is Pope Pius IX. The Catholic Church was bust, and along came a benefactor offering to bail them out in exchange for the help of the Jesuits infiltrating every church, every cathedral, every government office and business in the world to remove any evidence of the Tartarian Empire. And their name is called the Rothschilds, because they wanted complete control, and they still have today, of the world. The person who's the head of the Jesuit church today, the most powerful man in the Vatican, is Pepe Orsini. Orsini is a Rothschild. They're a Rothschild family. He's the grey pope. Most people think that the bloke wearing the white dress and occasionally a red pair of shoes, like Madeleine McCann's dad, is running the show. He is not. He's your PR man. Totally insignificant, doesn't matter. Behind him, you've got a black pope, and sat at the very top is Pepe Orsini, the grey pope. The grey pope runs the Catholic Church. You won't find much about him online. You won't find many photographs about him online. You'll find nothing on YouTube about him online. If you put something up, and I've done it, it will be taken down. If you put something on Facebook about him, you'll be banned for 3 months, which I was, and then you do it again and they close your account. He has complete control over everything. And with a little help from his friends, that's Napoleon and the Napoleon Comet of 1812. They did a series of rather unpleasant deeds, not just involving genocide and war, but were involving direct energy weapons. It was called the Napoleon's Comet, and across Europe in 1812, almost every town and city was hit by what they thought at the time was a meteorite or a comet, but it actually wasn't. They were directed energy weapons, because accidentally one picture that's still out there shows the Rothschilds and their cousins in the tail of the comet. And that's still, you can search, and you still should be able to find that online. When the comet hit, it caused all sorts of problems across the world. It wasn't just in Europe, but it actually echoed everywhere, and it caused a quake in New Madrid in America. It was so intense that the Mississippi here actually ran backwards. It switched direction 180 degrees. Metal objects were flying through the air, sticking to other metal objects. Wild animals were trying to get shelter by entering people's houses, and domesticated animals were going insane, and people were having to shoot their own pets. They became savage. That whole part of America around New Madrid was completely covered in about 10 inches of mud. Everything was buried. And there's a result. And you'll see that this is what we call a mud flood window. Because everything became buried, and this happened everywhere in the world, you couldn't get to the front door anymore. So what they did was they used feature windows, and the feature windows became the front door, and what was originally the ground level became a basement, sometimes 2 or 3 levels below. And we actually used to have an art gallery in Tiverton in Devon. And it had a basement to it, which isn't unusual. And we went down to the basement, but it had back doors that went out to a patio, so a sort of patio area. We thought, that's really strange. Why would there be a patio, a sort of back garden courtyard to a basement? And the landlord said, well, you'll never guess what. And of course, we already knew. But there was a fire and a flood, and some sort of mud flood happened in Tiverton. And everybody on this street, Gold Street it's called, everybody's shop and building ended up with a basement. And what they did was they pushed all the rubble and all the mud into the street and built the street up. So your ground floor became your basement. And the original front doors of our art gallery were downstairs behind a stud wall, completely bricked up. And it happened absolutely everywhere. And every now and again, someone does some work or some excavating and they uncover the original front doors. We were told that and I mentioned this earlier on about frequency, we were told that the bells were replaced because they needed them for the war effort. They were going to be melted down for ammunition. But what people have started finding is bells in sea, bells bottoms of lakes, and bells buried under sand. Thousands of them. They were dumped. They were dumped because they were 432 hertz. And if you think about it, if they replaced all of the church bells all across the world from 432 hertz to 440, and the bells were originally taken away because they were going to be melted down to make ammunition, how did they replace them? Where did the material come from to replace them? If they didn't have enough material to make ammunition to start with, how did they suddenly at the end of the war have the material to do it? They'd have had to have retrieved the bullets and the shells. Where did it come from? But people are still uncovering them today. And this is the person who was behind it, David Rockefeller. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. So, the population itself. In 1776, according to Encyclopaedia Britannica, the world population was 770 million. So this is before Napoleonic civil and the other civil wars that took, the American Civil War and so on, took place. Now, you can see the death toll at the bottom, 3.35 billion people died in a period of 100 years. Well, how do you double the population if 3 times the population are dead in the same period of time? It's not actually possible to do that. Or is it? How did we manage to double the population and lose 3 times the amount? How can you do that? I mean, even if those people hadn't died, the 3.35 billion, you can't double the world population in 100 years. Not through traditional methods, it's not possible. Yes, people had bigger families, but if you look at the life expectancy in the late 1700s and early 1800s, not many children actually got to become adults. So how did they do it? And that moves us on to the Cabbage Patch Babies. There are people out there, myself included, that have become a little bit obsessed with a series of postcards that became popular in the late 1800s. They depicted babies growing from cabbages. And this is old Slavic folklore. Children were told that they were found at the bottom of the garden, that they grew in cabbage patches. My mum was told, because her grandfather, as I said earlier on, was from Ukraine, Crimea, that she was found at the bottom of the garden. And traditionally, that was a way of getting out of talking about reproduction with your children, allegedly. And these postcards, and you can find them online, go on and on and on. There are hundreds of them out there. And some of them show people buying babies. And they started to become called repopulation postcards. And some of them actually advertised in the end, especially in France, babies for sale. These babies all came from somewhere, and nobody knows exactly where. But over a very short period of time, about 20 years, over 1 million babies appeared. How? They came from Germany, and they came allegedly from a place called a kindergarten, somewhere where you grow children. This is my favourite repopulation postcard for a number of reasons. One, it shows you that at the top, you can't see it very well on here, rose seeds going in to create girls, cabbage seeds going in to create boys, the machine churning, Masonic symbology, it's set at midnight, and of course you've got the Whore of Babylon, the Scarlet Woman, as Richard Branson adores with his Virgin Airline. Repopulation postcards. At the same time those postcards came out, the first narrated movie was produced. The lady's called Alice Guy. 2 years before this film came out, she was a secretary for a company that made film. And I don't mean a movie production company, they actually made the film itself. She was 19 years old. 2 years later, she is the first person to narrate a movie. She starred in it, she directed it, and she produced it. And it's called The Cabbage Fairy, and it depicts children being born from cabbage patches. She said that she took the inspiration after visiting the World's Fair in Paris and seeing babies in incubators on display. The only problem is, I've done some digging, the World's Fair she went to took place a year after the film was made. So she's lying. Her second film was called Midwife to the Upper Classes. You can find these on YouTube, they're still there. And this shows babies being purchased. Couples, middle class couples are turning up and they're buying babies. She's plucking them from cabbages and they're being sold. Which kind of leads us to a problem, which I mentioned a moment ago. How do you manage to get 1 million babies within 20 years from nowhere? That all appear in Germany, they're all shipped across the world, and they're found in kindergartens. So we've either got, when it comes to how we're created, Darwin's theory of evolution, the origin of species, which was funded by the Vatican, and Charles Darwin was a huge fan of incest, married his cousin, one of his cousins married their own brother, and so on and so forth. He actually lobbied Parliament to make incest legal. Or we've got the theory of Adam and Eve. As I said earlier on, most people know the Old Testament is the Epic of Gilgamesh rebranded. Now, the story of Adam and Eve says that in Genesis, that they removed a rib from Adam while he slept, and when he woke up, they'd stitched him up, repaired him, and created another life. Well, that's cloning, isn't it? Now, I had this argument with someone who was very religious, and unfortunately, they didn't know I'm ordained, so I let them dig a hole, and then they jumped in. And I said, so, okay, you're saying that it's just metaphoric, that actually, in the Bible, they're not talking about cloning, taking one life and creating another from it. It's just a metaphor. The metaphor describes cloning. So it doesn't matter whether it happened or not. It can be metaphoric or factual. The bottom line is, whoever wrote Genesis described how you would clone a person. How old's the Bible? And they walked away. They didn't want to have that anymore. Of course, as I said several times now, we know that it's the Epic of Gilgamesh we're referring to, where Enki and Enlil, the Anunnaki, they're not really called the Anunnaki, I think it's just I think it was Zachariah Sitchin who decided to call them that. They're actually called Sam, S-A-M, Sam. They came from Nibiru, created a slave race. The Agigi didn't want to dig and work in mines anymore, so they take Neanderthal man, tweak the DNA, and here we are, a slave race. Still very much a slave race today. The son of Enki on the right, who was the scientist, was called Marduk, and Marduk in Egyptology was known as Amun-Ra, When Amun-Ra fled, or left our realm, he left everything behind to his children. And he called his children, the children of Ra, the Ra-childs. They're still alive and well today. And you can see why they have this inbuilt decision or belief that they have a divine right to rule over us. Because they always did. We've always been slaves to the same bloodline, family, and it goes back 250,000 years. Some things never change. With regard to cloning itself, can they clone humans? Well, yeah, of course they can. This is Clonaid. This is Rail in the middle, who founded Clonaid in the Bahamas in the 70s. And if you go onto their website, clonaid.com, you can fill in a questionnaire. They'll contact you within 48 hours, and providing you've got the money, they will clone you. And they've been doing that for a very, very long time. The first girl that the first person that they cloned was actually a deceased lady from Florida, and the husband had her cloned, and the daughter was called Eve, and she was born in 1996. Since then, they've had quite a lot of bad press. They've had to move from the Bahamas. They got shut down. They're now in Canada, but the cloning itself takes place in Mexico because the laws are laxed there. Mexico, India, and South Korea, you can still clone. A lot of people think with cloning Dolly the sheep. That was the first time we heard publicly about cloning. Dolly the sheep's named after Dolly Parton because they used a mammary cell. And the person that, the doctor that was behind it, the geneticist that was behind it, was a huge fan of Dolly Parton. It's a mammary cell. Dolly Parton has big mammary, you know, blah, blah, blah. There's a really famous American rapper called Kid Boo. And Kid Boo has actually gone out on stage and said, here is my serial number. I am not Kid Boo. I am his clone. Kid Boo isn't here tonight. I'm performing for you. Here's my serial number. Check me on Clonaid, and you'll see that my serial number checks. And people have done it. And he's come out and said it. Kevin Hart has said that he's cloned on numerous occasions. No one took any notice. People are replaced. David Beckham's been replaced. Most people know Kate Middleton's been replaced, but David Beckham was replaced this year. They clone. They've been doing it for a very long time. And it's the same people. Behind Clonaid is the Rothschilds. Behind Dolly the sheep, which was at the Roslin Institute, up the road from the Roslin Chapel, is the Knights Templar. Behind the Knights Templar is the Rothschilds. The technology is very much out there. You just got to have the money. So in amongst the repopulation, we had the World's Fairs that I mentioned earlier on. And part of that was the incubator babies, which was a huge exhibit that went all over the world. And you could actually watch a human child, if you were prepared to stay there long enough, speed up the growth period. The last 3 months could be reduced to 3 days. And it was part of the PR. Watch a baby grow. Now, they told you that at the time that the babies were actually premature. In all the World's Fairs, Chicago, for example, St. Louis in America, the babies came from New York and they were on loan. And I've challenged this a few times. You've got a premature baby in New York, you're going to ship it to Chicago, and it's critically ill. How did you get it there? And what did the parents think? Are they all right about it going in a freak show? As an exhibit, when it's critically ill, unlikely to survive? You know, how does that work? No one's got an answer for that. And even more strange is that the London World's Fair that was at Alexandra Palace, the babies were on loan from Paris. So how did they get them from Paris to London? They're critical. They're 3 months premature. How did they get them across? And what did the parents say? There are no parents anywhere. There are no records of any parents. And these babies were all sold. You could buy them. Now, where were they getting the babies from? And the interesting thing is that this is the man behind it, Dr. Martin Cooney, German fella. I've done some research on Martin Cooney. He's not a doctor, doesn't have any qualifications whatsoever, none. Not in any country, not in Germany where he's from, Paris where he got allegedly the idea for the incubator from, based upon chicken poultry incubators that were which were being used in Paris Zoo. But what I did find out is that he'd married a Rothschild. Then we've got quite a sad side to what's happened to a lot of the children. I mentioned earlier on that the Lunacy Act meant that if you were widowed and you had children, then your children were taken away, because the Lunacy Act states that you couldn't possibly raise a child without a father. You were insane. So off the children go. And my mother's father was one of these. He was an orphan-trained kid. Oh, bless. That's my little boy. So these are the orphan trains. 250,000 children were shipped from New York. They arrived at New York from all across, mainly Russia, but all across Europe. They arrived in New York at the docks. They were then shipped to the Midwest, and they went to work on farms, they went to work in factories, and they went to work down mines. And incidentally, that's why we call children miners. That's where it actually comes from. They say when you say 250,000 were shipped, that you can really double that. We're probably talking closer to 500,000 children taken from their parents. Most of them, as I said, came from Russia, because that was a stronghold for Tartaria. Forced to speak a new language, denied their history, their ancestry, given new names, and in most cases beaten until they lost their accent too. There's a trail to this, and it starts off with the children. And what's interesting with this is, and the further you research this, the further you'll find that no matter how many photographs you pull up online, you're going to struggle to find any adults in them. Now, why is that? Is that because they were busy doing something else? They're not working in the factories, they're not working on the farms, they're not in the mines. Where are they? Well, they're dead. Most of them are dead, or they've been locked up. The adult population is what I showed you earlier on. That's what dropped. 3.35 billion adults died within 100 years, but we doubled the population at the same time with kids. And it was the children that were the Industrial Revolution, and the trail goes all the way back to repopulation. And they did everything. And there are your miners. Where are the adults? I mentioned earlier on about the technology that was being harnessed really from the ether, that was the main part of Tartaria. And I always refer to Tartaria as an echo of Atlantis. It was Atlantean technology that had been passed on and handed down. And then comes a man called Nikola Tesla. Really strange character. I don't know how many people here know much about him, but his backstory doesn't stack up. First of all, his surname's an anagram of steel, as in theft. That's the photo that we know. That's the photo that we normally see of Frank Zappa. Sorry, did I say Frank Zappa? Yes. Sorry, fraudulent slip there. I meant Nikola Tesla. I hope he existed. I really do, because this man was communicating with the Venetians. All of his information came in visions. He had visions. He never wrote anything down. He never had to practice anything. Every experiment was pointless, because when he invented something, it worked just as his vision predicted. Which is strange, because it took 2 truckloads to remove the files from his hotel room when he died to get them into a secure warehouse in New York. 2 truckloads of files written by a man who never wrote anything. Well, that's a bit weird. The visions came to him like blackouts, to a point where he couldn't determine whether he was in reality or in a dream. And he shared that from his mother. His mother invented household appliances. He had no children, so he's got no living descendants. None. His brother died. His sister allegedly had children, and I managed to track down someone who claimed in the end to be his nephew. I challenged her with a couple of questions, and in the end I got an email saying that Donald Trump had forbidden her to communicate with me any further on the subject. So I'm none the wiser. I might be on a hit list now, but I'm none the wiser. Either what she was saying was true, that she'd been stopped, or I think she might have been mad. I don't know, she's disappeared. So the man never wrote anything down. He had no living descendants either. But what's the strangest thing about Nikola Tesla for me personally is that this was a man we would, and I'm not going to hold him in the same category as Elon Musk, because Elon Musk for me is a fraud. He's never invented anything in his life. You know, he criticises the government, but that's where he gets all of his backing from. And he just employs people who are good at doing what he wants you to think he's good at doing. But if we look at, say, Elon Musk, for example, today, as being a pioneer in technology, you know, if we want something invented that's going to change the course of history, we would think, well, Elon Musk, you know, the car, you know, the tunnels that he's doing, the robotics he's now doing, the Neuralink, we think Elon Musk. Well, Tesla was the Elon Musk of his time. He was at the forefront of technology, you know, the X-ray machine, the remote control, but of course the lighting that's in here now, you know, alternating current. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now. So isn't it strange there's no video footage of him? None exists anywhere in the world. There does of Edison and there does of Einstein. Even JP Morgan, his backer, but not a single record or moving picture of Nikola Tesla. Why? I contacted his museum in Serbia and they said that they don't know why either. They suspect it might be because he was camera shy. And I said, this is the man that was allegedly paid to give talks, that was interviewed by every newspaper in the world. Everybody knew him. People wanted him at the dinner parties. And you're saying he was shy. That doesn't ring any bell. We haven't got any other answers for you. We don't know why there isn't any video footage of him. So I lean towards him not being a real person and that him being a figure that's created so they can slowly release the technology from the previous civilization into ours, label someone with it and say, it's this genius. He appeared from nowhere. I mean, if you study his backstory, it's incredible. He never even completed university. He got kicked out. He had a gambling addiction. He disappeared for a very long time. Most people thought he'd drowned and died. So it's all a little bit strange. And he lived off cream crackers and bred pigeons and was allergic to pearls. And it just gets weirder and weirder. There's a couple of pictures of someone that allegedly is that person there later on in life, about my age, clocking on for 60. I don't know if it's him or not. We've got Wardenclyffe Tower, but of course that's been demolished. JP Morgan thought he was backing radio transmission and was going to beat Marconi to the post so he could control news being broadcasted across the world. He then finds out that actually Marconi's beaten him to it, and that Tesla has been working on bouncing free energy around the world instead. So they cease funding and it's demolished and gone. And then this is all we end up with. Just before he died, this is the last photo taken of him. And I look at this and I look at that. I think, is that the same person? Because to me, I'm looking at Frank Zappa when I see that. And there's the hotel room he died in. A friend of mine's actually stayed in there. And he said he could feel some sort of presence. And some people believe that actually he'd built a Wardenclyffe, mini Wardenclyffe Tower inside the Hotel New Yorker. And that people could feel it vibrate and it was still active. But I don't know. Perhaps one day we'll find out. So what's the conclusion? What's the point of telling you all this stuff? Why do you need to know it? Well, history repeats itself. The last great reset was 1776. It wiped out 3.35 billion people. The majority of the population, at least the adults, were removed from the face of the earth. Their history was completely deleted. Textbooks were changed, Bibles were changed, a lot of evidence was removed. And they're doing it again now. And history does repeat itself. And you can see we're going through something very similar all over again. And I kind of think that forewarned is forearmed. If you know what they did before, you know what they're going to do now. Pandemics, asylums. I wait for knocks at the door. Are they going to take me away because of what I've said online? I'm not towing the line. I've been threatened. You know, I'm not towing the line. We know where you live. We're watching you. We've seen it all before. And what I want people to understand is this is happening now. And we've got to stop it. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. And they still do. What can we do about it? Unite. I don't believe anybody has the right to take somebody's life, even if they are a piece of shit called Rothschild. And that, you know, they've ceded the heir to the throne, you know, since the Napoleonic Wars. You know, Charles is a Rothschild, William's a Rothschild, Churchill's a Rothschild. They're all bloody Rothschilds. Trump's grandmother was a Rothschild. They're all Rothschilds. The only thing that they fear is us standing together, is us saying we don't care what religion you practice, what sexuality you are, what colour your skin is. Who gives a shit? Does that matter? If you're on the side of the road being cut out of a car by the fire service and you need a blood transfusion, are you going to ask what colour the person was? Or what, you know, sexuality they were? Or what religion they practiced? You don't care about these things. This is divide and conquer. We've got to unite. And I think that that's what they fear most. If we stand together and refuse to take any more of their crap, they're done. And I kind of think that that begins with turning off the news, because it's propaganda. Most of it's not true. It's all controlled and owned by the same people. What if we stop watching the news? What if tomorrow we decide we're going to boycott Tesco's? Everybody, we're just not going to go there. Imagine what we could do. We could change the world. So anyway, if you found any of that interesting, you can read more about it. My books are over there. There's not a lot of difference between these two, apart from one's hardback, one's paperback. But the special edition is in colour. And if you've already read that, and I know there are people in here that already have read it, I brought my sequel along. That's a much deeper dive into human cloning. And the reason I brought it is because some people are kind of already on board and have already read my first book. I did a poll before Christmas last year and said, out of all of the chapters in Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, which did you find the most interesting? 76% said human cloning. Well, I've been studying, most people know me on YouTube and other places on social media for Tartarian, because it's become my life really for the last 5 years. But I've been researching human cloning for 13 years. So I've put it all into that. So anyway, if you found any of that interesting, I have books. If you have any questions, far away now. But other than that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Now, you've been desperate to ask me something, haven't you? Thank you.